Okay. So again, thank you so much for your participation. Um, Essentially, the interview is comprised of three main segments. We'll start with logistics. We'll go into a bit of organizational assimilation and then job satisfaction. So we'll start now. And I'll start with the first question, which is which corporate function do you work in, or what type of work do you do?
Sure. I'm in human resources and I work on our inclusion, diversity, and equity team.
Got it. Okay. And what do you do specifically?
I manage our inclusion program strategy. So my role is focused on everything that we do at the enterprise level across the company, that is focused on teaching or reinforcing inclusive behaviors and the things we need to do to create a more inclusive working environment. So some of that is, training and educational programs. Sometimes that is, a lot of it is looking at our processes to make sure that we're thinking about how bias can creep into people related processes and procedures, and trying to combat bias through those processes. And then there's also kind of recognition and a lot of different stuff, but at a high level, that's kind of
Awesome. Okay. And if you could think back to when you joined, or even before you joined, what are some of the things that attracted you to your current employer?
Well, it's kind of funny. I started working at TIA because of my mom actually worked at TIA. And when I was first looking for kind of my first corporate job, I guess, she talked about TIA. And I think one of the things that I sort of knew about the company before I started, but the thing that has kept me at the company the longer that I've been here is that it is a company that's, while we are a financial services company, it's a company that's generally trying to do the right thing. Like, it's sort of a company with a heart. And, because I don't personally have any attraction to financial services. But I do care a lot about my values and how the place that I work reflects those. And I knew that early on about TIA, and I've kind of grown to understand that even more the longer that I've worked here.
Got it. Okay. And then considering your role, I think you might be very privy with this. Are you aware with any of your diversity and inclusion initiatives at your current place of work?
I am.
Yes. And just to name a few, I know you spoke of a few earlier, but just if you could go through a few of them, what
Sure. Yeah. So at kind of the highest level, so we have our business resource groups, which are the affinity groups. They do a lot of programming and opportunities to network, but also the BRGs are really, they're a great place for our employees to connect and to learn about each other and to find other people with similar interests, but also to learn how to be a better ally to people who are different to them. And then, but they also do a lot to bring a diverse perspective to everything that we do at the company. So we can go to our BRGs, or they can come to the company and say, like, hey, we're missing something over here. Like, we've got to do something about this product or this employee thing, and help us to make sure that as a company, we're presenting the way we want to. And that we're meeting the needs of everybody. So the BRGs are a really important part of our D&I work. We also do a lot, we've got unconscious bias training that we do, that's sort of foundational, but we've built onto that a lot. So now we do training around the concept of conscious inclusion, not just unconscious bias. We also do a lot of kind of ad hoc programs focused on specific topics that we want, that people are interested in, or we want to build awareness about. So things like teaching people about the gender spectrum and helping them to learn how to be respectful and understand the terminology, and disability awareness activities. And, we've got an event coming up next week about Juneteenth and exploring kind of the history of what all has happened since, since that date was initiated. And so we do a lot of educational and awareness building activities. And then we do a lot of CSR related, so corporate social responsibility work, where we want our associates, when they think about inclusion and diversity and equity, we don't want them to just think about it in the workplace. We also want them to be thinking about it outside of the workplace. So our corporate social responsibility team is part of the inclusion team, because we think of CSR as like inclusion in our community. So we do a lot of programming and using CSR as a way to get our employees to kind of put what they're learning into action.
Got it.
And out in the community.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. So just one thing that I noted that if you could just give me a little bit more insight into, because it's cool, the conscious inclusion training. What is that?
Yeah, so our conscious inclusion is something that we've been trying to shift people's mindsets towards, because it's definitely important to understand unconscious bias and to recognize that there are like unconscious things back there that are influencing how we see people. Like we've got to understand that foundationally, and understand that, no matter who you are, you're going to have unconscious bias. That's just the way the human brain works. But we're really focused on trying to shift just more into action and not just in like awareness building, because we've done a lot of that over the years. And so conscious inclusion, I think, is really all about putting what you're learning into action. So great. Okay. You know that unconscious bias exists. You know that you probably have some biases you need to deal with. So what are you going to do to make sure that you are combating that and proactively working on it on a daily basis? Because a lot of times in business, people will like, sorry, talk off, sit down. A lot of times in business, people will like, they'll have like D&I conversations, and they think that's the only time they have to talk about D&I, is when they're in the room with a D&I person or when HR is in the room. And the argument that we've been trying to make to everybody is like, no, you got to talk about this all. It comes into everything you do, your products, all your people decisions, everything you do, you have to be thinking about this. And so that's part of what we're trying to teach people with conscious inclusion.
Got it. No, I love it. Okay. And so then, what does essentially inclusion mean to you? I know that it's very much so in your work, but what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, inclusion for me personally, I think for the company too, is we like to use that phrase from, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on her, for Kim Crenshaw, I think, who talks about, diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think, we've used that a lot, but to me, inclusion is all about, like, it's one thing to make the effort to hire or to, bring people, whether it's hiring or outside of the workplace, just like who's in the groups that you spend time. And it's one thing to actively, try to be exposed to people who are different from you. But if you're doing all the stuff that causes people not to want to spend time with you who are different from you, then you're not being inclusive. And so there's no point in striving for diversity, because they're not going to want to be around you anyways. So inclusion is really for me, is all about, like, what are the things that we need to put in place, the behaviors that we need to put in place to make it possible for everybody to come into that space and stay in that space and feel happy and like they belong, and not like they're just there, as a representation number.
Got it. Okay. And then the last question of this segment, do you feel included, or that you belong at your current employer? Why or why not?
I do. Yeah, for the most part. I've struggled at my company over time because I've tended to be a lot younger
Mm-hmm.
People, that's changing over time. I'm not that young anymore. When I started at TIA, I was 23, and I've been here for 10 years now, so I'm getting more towards the average. But I was very young when I started compared to most of my colleagues, and we were a much generationally older company back then.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been times when I've worked at TIA where I've felt a little bit out of place because of that. But no, for the most part, it's a very welcoming environment. And I think the company does a good job of trying to encourage people, not enforcing this, like everything has to be 100% professionalism at all times.
Got it.
That, we've had times when, I've had feedback before, but like, you need to be wearing a suit to work every day. And I'm like, why? Like, I'm just as good at my job with a suit on as I am without one. And so from that perspective, there have been times where I've not always like loved and, felt like necessarily it was my place, but I think the company is moving away from that kind of strict old fashioned perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then, okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about organizational assimilation. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't think I do.
Okay. So, and that's okay. Organizational assimilation is essentially an employer's introduction of the company to the new hire, right? So the culture, the expectations, the norms, and essentially presented as a partnership, right? So thus allowing for the employee to also exchange their expectations and what they're used to and what they're looking for. And so and just knowing that briefly, what would you say that means to you and in sort of as it relates to your position and your at your current employer?
So, like, what do we need to do to assimilate, or what should we be doing to assimilate?
Yeah, or it's essentially, what does organizational assimilation mean to you? And so that could mean, having the right trainings in place, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information that needs to be passed through people when they first join the company. And I think that's always the really challenging part, is that you just, like, everybody always talks about like drinking from the fire hose. You're just like taking in so much information those first several months. And so I don't necessarily think that the trick is that we need to give people more information. I think it's that we need to figure out how to help teach people how they can find that information themselves, because you're never going to absorb everything that is even given to you anyways. Thing that I think is really important when you first begin is kind of setting a tone for, like, how do we operate as a company? What's our culture? What are our expectations? And what behaviors or what type of tone or whatever are valued and which ones are kind of unacceptable. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll keep it short.
Nope, that's good. And what, if you can remember, what did your first 90 days sort of consist of? You said it was about 10 years ago, but like, do you remember what your first 90 days sort of looked like?
Yeah. So my experience is a little bit, well, it's maybe not that unique, but I started at TIA as a CW for the first 6 months as a contract worker. So I probably didn't have the same experience that people coming in fresh to the company do as a full-time employee. But my first long time at the company, for the first almost 6 months that I was at the company, were I would say the things that I just mentioned about information and getting people what they need. I definitely did not have those things in my first couple of weeks. And I definitely didn't have, a good idea of what the expectations were of me and the culture. And so I would say my onboarding experience was, it wasn't terrible. It was not like a negative experience, but it definitely wasn't a good experience either.
Yeah, okay.
When I was converted to an employee, like I said, I think it was a little bit different because I had already been at the company, but that was like a lot. All I remember about that, and it was a while ago, I remember a lot of training, like a lot of training, and I could not tell you what any of that training content was today.
Okay. And so shifting gears just a little bit, still within the same segment of assimilation, but do you identify with your organization's core values?
I do. Yeah, I absolutely do.
And how so?
Well, our company is all about, we have our literal 6 values that are identified, and those are all, they're all kind of like kindergarten values. They're, like take personal accountability, like be a good teammate, the things that you would expect. But if I think about separately from just those values, which I absolutely agree with, just how the company operates, the company generally tries to do the right thing for people, knowing that we still have to balance business needs and all of that. The company is trying to figure out how to do things the right way for people while still meeting their business obligations, which I think is something I appreciate. But also our company is all about sort of bending over backwards to help our clients. And our clients are people who are putting positive things out in the world. We work with educational institutions, hospitals. The majority of our clients are nonprofit organizations. And so it's not these, not that 100% of those people are great all the time, but it's generally, these are institutions that are trying to like give back and do good things in the world. And so the fact that what we are is committed to helping them and enabling them to have easier lives, I think is something that really resounds with me.
Okay, awesome. And the last question of this segment is, do you think that you were assimilated similar to your peers? I know that it was kind of different because of the contract work. But yeah.
I think back then I was. I don't think that's the experience that people have today.
Okay.
But yeah, I think back then that's probably how it went for everybody.
And that was, so essentially, as a woman, things like that. Like, do you feel that you were assimilated?
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I probably wasn't. I think I probably was. It's hard to say because I was like pretty young and incompetent when I joined the company. Not that all young people are incompetent, but I was.
Uh-huh.
Some of how my onboarding may have been like, okay, this girl kind of doesn't know what she's doing. So, she needs a little extra hand holding. But I did have the experience early on, not probably because I'm a woman and probably because I was a young woman, of people calling me kid and things like that, which I definitely, didn't like. But I've had the benefit of really almost every manager that I've had at TIA in 10 years has been a woman. So I've had female leaders who have not treated me that way along the way, who have had really high expectations of me and kind of forced me to get it together along the way. So I do think that that's maybe somewhat of a difference. My very first manager was a man. And then from there, I've only ever had one other manager who was a man in the 10 years. It was mostly women. So I probably would have had more difference if I worked for more men along the way.
Got it. Okay. I can appreciate that information. Okay, so moving into our last segment, which is on job satisfaction. Are you satisfied at your current employer? Why or why not?
Yes, I think I am. I have really challenging work. No 2 days are ever the same. And it's exactly the job that I've wanted to do. So it was a job that I strived for a long time. And it's, I've gotten to make so much of it in the time that I've been in the role. So one of the things that I like about TIA is that we're literally a 100-year-old company. The company started in 1918. but somehow I still feel like it feels like we work in a startup sometimes. And I don't know if that it says something good about the company or not, but for me personally, it's been good because it feels like I get to work on projects that feel like I'm like building something brand new, which feels, you know, like a high level of responsibility and kind of new and innovative and interesting. And it feels like I'm gaining expertise. But if I wanted to go somewhere else, I would be bringing kind of having experiences that a lot of people haven't. I'm not having to just like come in and run a process. I get to be creative and do different things and work for a company that's, you know, kind of putting their money where their mouth is. And especially when it comes to my job, like we're really dedicating the time and energy to this diversity and inclusion stuff. And it would be hard to find that at another company that's doing it at this level, I think.
Okay, awesome. If you could, so you sort of touched on it, and so the next question was your top 3 reasons why you feel satisfied. And so that startup, building something new, innovated. I kind of heard things like maybe your voice is heard. What do you think would be, are those, that was that lumped into maybe the one, or are there 2 other things that you have, or like?
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd call out, just not with my specific role, but just my time at TA, the reason I've been here for 10 years is because they've done a really good job, for me at least, of committing to internal mobility. And so if there's ever been a time where I haven't been happy in the role that I was in, or I kind of wanted the new challenge or wanted something different, I've been able to find a new role within the company that was interesting. And the people around me have supported that happening. So I didn't have people like blocking and saying like, no, you need to stay in this role. And so I think that that's one of those things where, you know, if I hadn't been able to get this D&I job that I was trying to get for years, I probably would have left the company. Or, you know, if I'd had to stick in that one role that I didn't like that much, I probably would have left the company, but like a new opportunity
Certainly
came up. So I think mobility is a really important part of it.
Okay.
And then I think flexibility is a really important piece too. We've been trying to become more flexible over the years, and I think that's a really important thing to me. Like there have been periods, during my time at TA, where I've worked full-time remote, and like right now, obviously I'm working full-time remote during the pandemic, but even before, there were times when I was working full-time remote. And when we go back into the office, we'll be hybrid. So it'll be, you know, a couple days in the week in the office, a couple days at home, and we'll have that flexibility to manage it to our needs. And that's a really big deal for me. There was a period of time in 2019 where TA was trying to roll back our work from home. And that was the first time that I was like, maybe it's time to leave TA. And then not thankfully, but the pandemic came along and taught TA that doesn't work. And so now I'm like, okay, we're good. We can stick to TA. But flexibility, I think, is a really important part, because I just like the whole, like, you have to be at work these hours, and you have to be online all the time and be in the office all the time, and you have to dress a certain way and act a certain way. Like all that kind of confining stuff would be a really real big turnoff for me at another company.
Got it. Okay. Are you involved in any activities sort of within your current employer, but are outside of your role responsibilities?
You know, I'm not right now, because a lot of the side activities that we do are things that my team, or the inclusion team runs. So like I used to be part of our volunteer council, but now I'm part of that team. So I don't need me on the council. So not right now, really. I'm a member of all of our BRGs. That's a big one for people to kind of non-work related. Well, I guess there is one thing. I'm part of our corporate lab right now, which is sort of like an innovation lab program that we have at the company. It's still work, but it's outside of my regular day job. And it's focused on like a company. We've focused on kind of experimentation and research on a specific company issue.
Yeah.
And so I guess that would be kind of a side thing that I'm involved in right now.
Awesome. Okay. And then we have two more questions. Are there any mentorship opportunities available at your place of work?
Yeah, absolutely. There are actually lots of mentoring programs at the company. Some of our line of business, some of our different lines of business have their own mentoring programs. Our BRGs have mentoring programs. And then we're in the process right now of trying to build a sponsorship program. Okay. So focused on really teaching people what sponsorship is all about and how it's different from mentorship, and then encouraging them to seek out those sponsorship relationships.
Okay. And are you involved in any of those? Like maybe were you mentored, or are you a mentor?
I haven't been part of a formal mentoring program, but I've definitely had lots of mentors over my time at TIA. It wasn't like a formal decision, but I would say there are probably, there have been probably 5 or 6 different people over my time at TIA, and some of them are still at the company that I still talk to regularly.
Got it.
Sort of a informal mentoring relationship.
Okay. And so shifting gears, so our last question is sort of 3 parts, but what are your personal and or professional goals?
Personal and professional. Professionally, this is what I'm actually struggling with right now, because like this was my dream job. And so I'm trying to figure out where I go next. I want to keep doing what I'm doing, but I don't quite know yet how I expand this role. I think it probably has to do with, taking on more responsibility and being more visible and some of those things that I'm not terribly excited about. That I do want to stay in inclusion and diversity. And I just want to do this work, I guess. Personally, I just bought my first house, so I would like to move into that house, which I'm doing next month. But I've actually, for the first time, been starting to think about starting my own family. I'm a single woman, but I'm going to look to adopt in the next couple of years because I'm ready to do some of that. So I'm kind of starting to try to do some of those adult things at the moment. So I would say that's my biggest personal goal right now.
Got it. Awesome. And do you feel supported by your organization with those personal and professional, right? I think certainly, you shared that you wanted this role, you essentially got it. But
yeah, I do. I was actually just talking to my coworker the other day, who is sort of one of those informal mentors. And we were talking about what am I going to do next in my role. And she was trying to brainstorm with me. She's a leader. She's not my manager, but she's a leader in the inclusion team. And so she was trying to brainstorm with me and like, she's like, let's figure it out. Like, what's the next role for you on the team? Like, we can make something up. Like, let's talk about it, which is really great. And then personally, like I, put on my calendar today that I put my PTO for my move, and the head of the inclusion team emailed me and said, hey, do you have help for your move? Like, I'm like, what, are you going to come help me move? So I'm not going to take her up on that, but like, that's the level of, concern for people that, so yeah, I would say that our team is really great about that.
And if, I can ask, so just even your personal goal as a single woman, do you feel that you'd be supported in that goal, right, as starting a family, just from, like that, that can oftentimes be a lot with work, right? So like, do you feel that you will be supported, or do you feel now that, okay, I could do this at your current employer?
Yeah, I think I could if I could do it anywhere, it's probably TIA. I mean, for one thing, we have a great benefit. So we have a benefit for adoptive parents. So like I'll be able to take parental leave when the adoption happens, and the company actually funds will reimburse me for, I think, like up to $10,000 towards an adoption. So from that perspective, there's great benefits. Alfie, stop. From a day-to-day single mom, I think that will be challenging for sure. I think the flexibility is going to be a really big part of that, but it definitely that's the thing that makes me the most nervous about doing it, because my family doesn't live around here. Like my family's in Ohio, and I moved down here to work at TA, so I don't really have much of a network here in Charlotte. So I don't have a lot of people that I can rely on, other than like my coworkers, which, I feel like there's kind of a line there to be. So that is the biggest thing, is like, how will I balance this as a single person who doesn't have like a ton of people that I can rely on to help me in a moment of need. But I think from to the extent that I would want the company to support me on that, I think the company would do their best. The team would do their best to be understanding, if I got to step away for a kid thing or,
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I hope that wasn't too personal. I just think that.
Not at all. No, I wouldn't have shared it if I wasn't willing to talk about it. No, it's not at all.
Okay. And then do you feel, and this is the last part of that question, do you feel that you're making progress towards your goals? Well, certainly, I definitely think so with all that you've shared. But do you feel that you're making progress?
I think so. Yeah. I think especially in the last year, I feel like I've, made a big leap forward. The buying the house thing is a big part of, getting settled enough that I feel like I can get some of my personal goals started from an adoption perspective. And then at work, this year has been challenging because I felt most of the first half of the year, I felt pretty burnt out. I think after last year was a big year, I think, for everybody. And so I was dealing with a lot of burnout at the beginning half of this year, but I feel like I'm starting to get my mojo back, if you will, at work. And I feel like I'm making progress again. I wasn't for a minute there, but I feel like I'm getting there now.
Okay. Well, that essentially wraps up all the questions that I have, unless you have anything more that you'd like to share as to how you feel your current employer is, really working to retain women. Yeah, I think we're done here.
Okay. No, I think that's everything. But if there's anything else I can share, just let me know. I'm happy to help however I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.